Hey everyone, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. I am joined today by Kenneth Crowther. He is the Product Security Leader for Xylem Applied Water Systems and America's Commercial Teams. We're talking about the 100-day cybersecurity sprint for the water and wastewater industry, what it means for professionals, and what's coming next. So Kenneth, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today.
Yeah, I'm happy. Thanks. Thanks for
Yeah,
inviting me.
oh, this is a big issue. This has been a growing issue over the past, basically over the course of the pandemic. There's been a lot of talk on cybersecurity for water and wastewater. Um, why? What did the administration indicate was kind of necessary when it was looking at this 100-day cybersecurity sprint? Like, why was this even initiated to begin with?
So I think one thing to remember is that this isn't the first 100-day sprint.
Hmm.
So the first 100-day sprint, I think, was with the electric power sector. And then there was a 100-day sprint with pipelines, I think. And so
Hmm.
this is the third. And so what we've been noticing is that over the last couple decades, even probably all the way back into the 90s, critical infrastructure has become more digital, more connected, and that's provided opportunities for adversaries, whether they're
Hmm.
high school script kiddies, right, all the way up to nation states who want to gain some persistence in the United States. And so this each sprint has been this opportunity to really just kind of focus in on how does the sector work, whether or not there's the right authorities in place, um, do the right skill sets exist, and just to kind of get a really focused and holistic time spent. And so this sector came, uh, the water sector, we've started to, there's a lot of chatter and discussion about adversaries starting to kind of shift their focus onto the water sector, as particularly as the electric sector and the pipeline sector has started to shore up things.
Hmm.
Um, in the US, we're at a kind of a pivot point where we have a lot of aging infrastructure. And one way to effectively fix that problem is to go digital. Um, and I have some stories if you're interested in what's kind of motivating that. But basically, the bottom line is that going digital will save a huge amount of money in terms of capital investments,
Hmm.
and it will even return continuously in terms of increased operational efficiency. But that comes with additional cyber exposure. And
Yeah.
so this is a good time for the 100-day sprint, although I don't know what the administration actually was thinking. It is good timing for a 100-day sprint focused on the water sector
Hmm.
as we're about to go through this big investment in water upgrades and potential transformation to digital connected systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the you mentioned there like the electric sector, and I often hear about like, oh, what can we learn from them? But there is like this difference between the water and wastewater sector and the electric sector in terms of like how you can implement, because with electric you have a lot of these bigger consolidated systems. With water and wastewater it's very fragmented. Could you speak a little bit to like the challenges that that poses in trying to like borrow essentially like these frameworks that worked over here but may not necessarily work in full over here?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. So in the in the electric sector, so my former job was at GE, and we
Okay.
worked with these. We worked a lot in the with a lot of different power companies, and these companies were big, and they had a lot of really smart people. They had a lot of instrumentation people and digitization people and network people, and they were able to borrow that expertise in order to write requirements very effectively and kind of demand the kind of cybersecurity that they need. And they had cybersecurity professionals, but there was only a couple dozen large electric utilities, and then transmission and distribution is highly interconnected. The water sector is not like that.
Mhm.
I think instead of a couple dozen companies, I think CISA published that there's over 150,000 water and wastewater systems, and that there are somewhere in the range of 60,000 plus utilities that own and operate those systems. And if we look at the AWEA reporting, which required, I think even the smallest ones had to have served more than 3,000 meters. There was only something like 9,000 submissions of AWEA. And so that means that in excess of 50,000 utilities serve fewer than 3,000 meters. And that's a significant portion. I mean, I imagine that they probably have fewer than 20 employees. Some of these small utilities literally only have 10 employees or so.
Oh yeah.
That are doing all the work of procurement, instrumentation, operations. And the idea of each one of them adding a new cybersecurity professional is a little bit outside of the realm of reasonable. And so what worked in the electric in the electric sector is not something that will translate, at least not so straightforward. It's not something that will translate into the water sector. So we need a new model.
Yeah, at least not one to one. But that does bring up the question then of traditionally, how have water and wastewater utilities handled this particular issue? I feel like, at least in my experience from hearing from folks, is water and wastewater systems haven't always been online, so it's not always been a very big issue to deal with. But now, because of all these digital technologies, smart technologies, it's opening up that possibility a little bit more. But yeah, like how have utilities strategically handled these types of security issues in the past?
Yeah, so there are some goods and some bads, right, that come
Yeah.
from our existing model. You're right that we do have a lot of aging utilities, and a lot of those are metal and concrete. But what they're finding is that they add on a handful of sensors and they put on a controller. Now they're saving thousands to millions of dollars per year in operational effectiveness. Now they put that controller with some kind of a gateway and connect it out to give them some kind of remote visibility. Now they don't have to make that. I mean, think about in the middle of Kansas, right? A water utility that has 6 wells that are, you know, 50 plus miles apart from each other. Some guy has to go around and check all of these things. If you now have a controller that can connect to a gateway, now you can have complete visibility. Now that person can prioritize their time and they can spend the time in the right place. But connecting that controller and those sensors out to the cloud requires some level of expertise. And this is where we start to get into why this transformation is potentially leading to this slippery slope. And the question is, what's the new model? And
Yeah.
so if I can just talk for a little bit to frame that.
Yeah, please do.
So one case study that I read when I first started here at Xylem was with South Bend, Indiana. And so Secretary Buttigieg was the mayor at the time. So it's kind of it's becoming a well-known
Yeah.
place. And so at the time, they were dumping probably, because of their aging wastewater infrastructure, on the order of like a dozen Olympic-sized swimming pools of water into the St. Joseph's River per day, if you average it out across this. And there were some growing problems and some growing concerns. I mean, even they were having to limit recreational activities in the St. Joseph's River because of the possibility of contamination. And they went to a standard engineering company that basically said, look, to fix, think metal and concrete, right? To fix this wastewater system, it's going to cost on the order of $850 million. And that ends up, for a small town like South Bend, that ends up being something like $11,000 per person or something like that, right? Just something that you don't want to ask the public to have to take out bonds for. And so when we started interacting with them, we recognized immediately that we need more data, we need more sensors, we need more advanced algorithms for how we do this control. And so we installed something like 200 level flow sensors throughout the system. And after about 4 months of data, we realized that they had a lot of downstream capacity. They weren't utilizing it because they didn't have the control sophistication in order to utilize that downstream capacity. And so with only about $200 million in modifications, they were able to take advantage of the capacity that they had. And but now realize that this is starting to introduce a new model, right? They didn't own all of these sensors. The sensors didn't only go to their own operation center. They connected through our gateway to our cloud, and that way we could add analytics as the system was being developed and deployed. And we can still continuously add analytics.
Mhm.
And so in this case, they saved $500 million, right, in capital investments. All of a sudden made their wastewater transport system affordable,
Mhm.
and it eliminated water overflow during the drier seasons, and it reduced a wastewater overflow by something like 70% or something during the wetter seasons. And not only did it save them in those capital investments, we were able to institute a new kind of algorithm. So before, you have to design the control algorithm for the controller, put it onto the controller. And if you need those controllers to talk to each other, you have to instantiate some kind of network. Well, in this case, all of the information from these controllers is being pulled back to the cloud. And so you can think of it kind of like a little stock market. And so all of these level and flow sensors are seeing water start to rise, and the acceleration and the shift in wastewater. And so they're like bidding on downstream capacity. And so this like little electronic stock market is deciding how to optimally use that downstream capacity. And so as of right now, I think they're still saving $1.5 million every year in terms of improved operational efficiency. But you can see that this starts to create this kind of new model, right? They're relying on us to protect that communication that's going back to a cloud that we maintain, and that communication that's going back to their system. And I think that's a model that we can uh, start to rely on for future of cybersecurity across the sector. So we have a PSOC. It's a Product Security Operations Center.
Okay.
Um, and so our PSOC actually monitors all of that traffic that's coming back and forth. They look at who's logging in or what machines are logging in, what they're doing, the activities that are going on. They're making sure that communication is continuously available. And in our case, we don't need to add one new cybersecurity professional for every new installation, because we're creating a lot of automation. We have a threat intel group that is looking at what the tactics and techniques of adversaries are. That's resulting in a kind of a backlog of automation of things that we want to look for, how we utilize the indicators of compromise that are published and put them into our systems for our particular infrastructure. And that automation is creating a lot of efficiency on our back end. And so we could probably add a dozen or so new utilities before we have to add one more professional to engage with that automation to make sure that we have the response capacity if we need. And so I
Yeah.
think that that sets us up maybe to share that responsibility of cybersecurity with the utilities. And I think this is a model that could really make a difference in the
Yeah.
water sector.
Honestly, it makes a lot of sense because like we talked about, like how fragmented and how small there are a lot of these utilities, and being able to be like, all right, here's a region of like a set number of utilities that are rather small. We are providing this service to them, and we will also help maintain the security here. It allows you to centralize the intelligence of everything and keep everything contained. It's like one of the key things about security of this nature is that it kind of needs to be centralized somewhere so that there's very clear oversight on like who has handled what, right? So
Right.
it
Right.
sounds like a great concept, and would work really well for this particular space because of how fragmented everything is.
Yeah. And we're trying to build it out. So I'll mention a couple things. So we're members of the Water ISAC, and
Hmm.
I mean we look at every single publication that comes. So Water ISAC is this entity that basically reaches out across as widely as they can everything relating to security of water, not just cyber,
Okay.
but also physical security and stuff like that. And so we consume what they're doing.
Hmm.
We're now members of so DHS has this organization called CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and so CISA has really, over the last 6 months, they've started creating these things called the Joint Cyber Defense Collaboratives, JCDC,
Okay.
and uh, and so they just started as of 3 weeks ago a JCDC focus area that is focused on protecting industrial control systems, and mainly focused on uh, all of critical infrastructure. Some of the initial focus is going to be on pipelines because CISA has has a direct relationship with TSA, which is part of DHS,
Hmm.
for protecting those pipelines. But what they're doing is they're trying to change the model from information sharing, um, which has always had questionable outcomes as to
Yeah.
whether it's worked. Um, and they're trying to change the model to focus on operational collaboration. And
Okay.
what's happening is that refocus on operational collaboration is actually making information sharing work. Um,
Hmm.
and so we're one of those inaugural kind of members of that focus area with with the other companies, and so I can list them out because it was in CISA's press release. So companies like GE and Honeywell and Schneider Electric, um, Schweitzer, Dragos, Nozomi, Clarity, some of the big cybersecurity firms that focus on industrial control systems. And
Hmm.
then another thing that we've done is we've actually formalized a partnership with Dragos. And so in those areas where we just don't quite have the capacity, um, we can reach out to Dragos. And when utilities don't want to have that, um, shared responsibility model,
Yeah.
then we can basically say, well, here's a company that we've partnered with.
Hmm.
We've reviewed how they work, what they do, and we know that you can trust them. I'm sure there's a lot of trustworthy organizations, but this is one company that we've partnered with
Hmm.
as we go to the water sector.
So what are you seeing? What do you see as kind of the next step here? So we have this 100-day sprint, right? We're talking about some of the challenges involved in that, and like just the fragmentation of things, and some of the models that are sprouting up to handle that. What do you kind of see as happening next? Like where do we go from here?
Well, so this is where I think we can maybe learn a little bit from just cloud infrastructure in general.
Okay.
So Amazon, when they started setting up, so early 2000s, I don't know exactly how the story goes, but it's something like, Jeff Bezos came to his organization and said, we're wrapping all of our cloud functionality as a service, and it's going to make it completely scalable, interoperable, and all that stuff. And they were able to very quickly start offering what we now know as cloud services. And
Hmm.
it transformed Amazon, and then it transformed everywhere else. But what they started realizing was even if they have a secure platform, once people start adding their own applications onto it, those applications could have vulnerabilities. And those applications could poorly implement authentication. Those applications could poorly implement user control, all that stuff. And so they wanted to make it clear that they can only do so much, but that they're willing to kind of share that responsibility.
Hmm.
And I think, Azure, Google, even Alibaba, all these other cloud providers have kind of started mimicking that kind of shared responsibility model. But the
Hmm.
first thing that they did is they kind of codified it, where they said, here's the security context. here's what we can do in that context to help provide security. And then here's what we expect you guys to do in order to protect your operations.
Hmm.
Because, I mean, Microsoft can secure Excel all that they want, but they can't keep us from like putting people's sensitive information in it and posting it on the web, right? So somehow we need to figure out how to codify this shared responsibility in a much clearer way. And so I know that there's a group, we're members of this. So the ISA has published a set of standards um, through the International Electro Commission, IEC. I can't remember
Okay.
what the acronym stands for,
We'll
but
find it for you.
the number is IEC 62443.
Okay.
So the 62443 standards provide a whole like family of standards, all the way from like how does a company that makes digital products create an organization that can create secure products. And
Hmm.
then there's another standard on, well, what should those secure products actually look like? And then there's another standard on, well, how do you properly segment a system so that you're trusting the right things and you're not trusting other things? And you have these like zones and conduits that provide an architecture that can be secured. And then there's another standard on, well, what should the security checklist actually look like for the system when you're deploying it?
Hmm.
And right now, what we're doing is we're looking across all of those, that family of standards, and we're trying to think through what would this look like for critical infrastructure when we have a shared responsibility like for IIoT, right? This industrial Internet of Things, which is what I think the water sector is going to start looking like if we go down this path. And
Hmm.
so in that case, what we're doing is we're saying, well, the organization does need to have these 4-1 product cyber things, right? They do need to also have the widgets or the devices need to be 4-2, right? These kind of security things. When we package it as a system, right, it needs to have this 3-2 segmentation and this 3-3 security controls. And then when we go to provide this as a service, then it needs to have this 2-4. And so we're
Okay.
starting to kind of take all the slices out and say, this is what secure IIoT would look like. And that kind of helps to start providing a foundation for how to formalize this.
Hmm.
Once we've formalized what a shared responsibility starts to look like, then I think we need to see if we can codify it somehow.
Yeah.
And that's where I know that AWWA right now has published this kind of white paper on how can we how can we take a NERC-like approach where there's a
Hmm.
third party that understands the depth of the sector and has cybersecurity knowledge. They can then provide this framework, and then EPA can just say, we adopt those standards and we're going to regulate to those standards that these cybersecurity experts have brought forward.
Yeah.
So I think the next steps look something like that, although I don't have maybe a clear path yet.
Yeah, or a timeline for that matter. It's
That's
it's
right.
gonna
Yeah.
it's gonna take a little bit of time to really get all of these pieces in place and to establish the standards, as you had said as well. But anyway, thanks so much, Kenneth. I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with us about this. It's really nice to get a little bit more into the weeds a little bit on some of these things, because oftentimes when I've spoken with people, it's been so high level that I haven't really gotten a idea of some of like these elements of like trying to standardize things and like what works and how we can feed from one another. So I really appreciate you taking the time on that. And for everyone who's watching, definitely check out our video description below. We have some resources in the additional resources box. We'll have a link here from Xylem on some of the things that they're doing for cybersecurity. And once more to Kenneth, thank you so much for being here. Appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah. Thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me. And it was fun to talk about these things.